My name is Natalie Carter. I'm 31 years old. And the strange thing about the moment your life splits open in public is that it doesn't always arrive sounding like disaster. Sometimes there's no shouting, no broken glass, no dramatic warning your body can brace against. Sometimes it walks in quietly, dressed like celebration. And by the time everyone around you is smiling, raising glasses, congratulating you, you're already realizing something is very, very wrong. 3 hours before everything shifted, I was sitting in one of the nicest restaurants I'd ever been to, celebrating the biggest achievement of my career, regional vice president. At 31, the youngest in my company's history, 6 years of grinding, late nights, early mornings, pressure that sat on your chest even when you were trying to sleep. And somehow, I made it. The company organized a dinner. Not huge, just intimate enough to matter. My CEO, my direct boss, the SVP, a couple of senior directors, their spouses, and me. All I had to do was show up, be presentable, and bring my boyfriend. His name was Ethan Blake. We'd been together for 2 years. And if I'm being honest, the cracks had been there long before that night. Ethan wasn't jealous of my job. Not exactly. It was something quieter, more subtle, more dangerous. Dismissive. Like because he didn't understand what I did, he'd already decided it couldn't possibly be that important. Whenever I talked about a big client win or a presentation that went well, he'd smile faintly and say, "That's nice, babe," in the same tone you use when a kid shows you a drawing. And I let it go. Over and over again, I let it go. I told him about the dinner 2 weeks in advance. I told him it mattered. I told him my CEO would be there. I told him very clearly, "Please, just be engaged, just for a couple of hours." He rolled his eyes, but he said yes. The night of the dinner, he looked good. I'll give him that. Clean shirt, confident posture, the version of him that made people like him quickly. We walked in. Everyone was already seated. My CEO stood up immediately when he saw me. Firm handshake, direct eye contact. "Natalie, congratulations, well deserved." His wife smiled warmly at me, then turned to Ethan, already trying to include him. For the first 30 minutes, everything was fine. Appetizers arrived. Conversations flowed. My boss told a story about my first month when I accidentally sent the wrong policy quote to a client for double the amount. Everyone laughed, even me. It felt normal. Then my CEO raised his glass and gave a toast. It wasn't long, maybe a minute, but every word landed. He talked about my growth, the accounts I brought in, how the board had unanimously approved my promotion. And for a moment, I felt it, that rare, quiet pride, like all the exhaustion had finally turned into something real. I glanced at Ethan. He was on his phone, under the table. During the toast, I nudged his foot. He looked up, gave a tight smile, and slipped the phone away. Dinner continued. Main courses came out. My CEO's wife asked Ethan what he did. He gave a one-sentence answer, then went back to pushing food around his plate. Someone else tried to include him in a conversation about a show. "I don't really watch TV," he said flatly, which was almost funny, because we had binge-watched an entire series just days before. But I ignored it. I kept carrying the conversation, smiling, engaging, performing. About 90 minutes in, there was a natural lull. My CEO was mid-sentence, talking to me about a potential client relationship he wanted me to lead. And that's when it happened. Ethan leaned closer, not whispering, not even trying to be subtle. "Can we leave?" he said. "I'm bored, and honestly, you're not even that important at your company. This whole thing feels excessive." Silence. Not the comfortable kind. The kind that drops like glass shattering in slow motion. My CEO stopped talking. His wife looked down at her plate. My boss suddenly found his wine glass very interesting. Someone coughed. And for about 4 seconds, time stretched. I looked at Ethan, waiting for some sign he understood what he'd just done. There was none. He looked at me like he'd just asked me to pass the salt. So I did the only thing I could do. I set my napkin down, stood up slowly, and said calmly, "Of course, let me take you home." I turned to my CEO. "I'm so sorry. I'll be back shortly if you're still here. Dinner is on me tonight." He didn't react, just nodded once. "Take your time." The walk to the car was silent. The drive was worse. 15 minutes of nothing. Then, "Why are you being weird?" Ethan said. Silence. "Oh my God, are you seriously mad? I was just being honest." Still silence, because I knew, if I spoke in that moment, I wouldn't say anything I could take back. I pulled up outside his apartment, unlocked the doors. He didn't move at first. "You're not coming in?" he asked. "No. So you're choosing your work people over me?" I looked straight ahead. Good night, Ethan. He slammed the door hard enough to shake the car and walked inside without looking back. I sat there for a minute, hands on the wheel, breathing, letting the anger settle into something colder, clearer. Then I turned the car around and drove back. When I walked into the restaurant again, they were still there. Another round of drinks on the table. My boss stood up first. You okay? I'm okay, I said. I'm really sorry about that. My CEO waved a hand. Sit down. We've all been there. Then he smiled slightly. My first wife once told a client I was boring at a company golf event. His current wife laughed, which is why he upgraded. The table loosened. Laughter returned. And somehow, we kept going. Another hour and a half. Conversations deeper, more honest. At one point, my CEO looked at me and said, "The way you handled that told me everything I need to know about you." That night, I drove home with two completely different feelings sitting side by side. Pride, and something that felt a lot like grief. Because I knew, even if I didn't say it out loud yet, something in my relationship had just ended. I just hadn't caught up to it, fully. Not yet. 5 days passed. I didn't call him that night. I didn't call the next morning either. And Ethan didn't call me. That silence told me more than any apology could have. Because people who know they've crossed a line usually do one of two things. They either rush toward repair, or they rush toward defense. Ethan did neither. He just waited. Like the burden of reopening the conversation belonged to me. Like I was supposed to cool off, come back, and reassure him that the awful thing he'd done wasn't actually that awful. Sunday morning, 2 days after the dinner, his text finally came through. Are you going to keep pouting, or are we going to talk like adults? I stared at the message for a long time. Not because I didn't know what I felt, because I did. Too clearly. I went to the gym first, ran harder than I needed to, stayed on the treadmill until my lungs burned, and the anger finally started turning into language. Then I got breakfast by myself, sat near the window of a coffee shop with eggs going cold in front of me while I replayed every moment of that dinner in my head. The toast, the silence, his face, that casual, thoughtless cruelty. And underneath all of that, something older. 100 tiny moments I'd minimized because they were easier to swallow one at a time. The way he'd smirk when I talked about work trips. The way he called my presentations little speeches. The way he once told a friend at a barbecue in front of me, Natalie likes to pretend she runs the world because she knows Excel. Everybody laughed, including me. That was the problem. I had been laughing at things that were quietly cutting me open. Around noon, I texted back. I think we should talk in person. I can come by around 3. He replied almost immediately. Fine. No apology. No softness. Just fine. That one word settled something in me. By the time I drove to his apartment, I already knew what I was going there to do. I just didn't know yet how ugly he would make me work to do it. He opened the door in gray sweats, arms crossed, expression sharpened before I even stepped inside. There was no relief in his face, no warmth, no sign he'd spent the last 2 days reflecting. He looked irritated, like I was late to an argument he'd already decided he'd won. So, he said, stepping aside, are you done with the silent treatment? I stayed near the door. Didn't sit. Didn't take off my coat. He noticed. His eyes flicked down, then back to mine. And for one brief second, something uncertain passed through his face. I think some part of him realized then that this wasn't going the way he expected. I want to break up, I said. Just like that. No warm-up. No soft landing. His face changed instantly. What? I'm ending this. Over a dinner? He gave this short, disbelieving laugh. You're being serious right now? Yes. He stepped back like I'd slapped him. You cannot be serious. I am. All of this, he said, pointing between us, over one stupid comment? And there it was. That phrase. That little minimizing trick. One stupid comment. As if humiliation only counted when the person causing it felt like counting it. You humiliated me in front of the most important people in my career, I said. My CEO was speaking to me. Everyone at that table influences my future. And you looked at all of them, at me, and said I wasn't important. I said you weren't that important at the company, he snapped. Which honestly is still true. They were acting like you cured cancer. Something inside me went very still. Not because that line hurt more, because it clarified everything. This wasn't embarrassment talking. This wasn't someone who'd said the wrong thing under stress and woke up horrified by it later. This was him. This was what he believed. The dinner hadn't created the truth. It had exposed it. You really don't hear yourself, do you? I asked quietly. He threw his hands up. I was bored, Natalie. I sat there for 2 hours listening to insurance talk. Do you know how painful that was? Yes, I said. I do. Which is why I told you ahead of time what kind of dinner it would be. which is why I asked you, clearly, to be polite and present for one evening. 1. He scoffed. God, you're acting like I ruined your life. No, I said. I'm acting like you revealed something I can't unsee. He stared at me, then laughed again, but this time there was panic under it. So that's it? 2 years? Gone? Because I wasn't fake enough at your corporate little pageant? I swallowed. Because that hurt. Not the insult. The 2 years. The reality of how easily they were collapsing into this version of us. Cold, defensive, ugly. It wasn't one night, I said. It was 2 years of comments. 2 years of you making it clear that what matters to me doesn't matter to you. Friday was just the first time you did it in front of other people. That's insane. No, I said, it's overdue. He turned away from me then, pacing toward the kitchen and back. I watched him drag a hand through his hair, muttering to himself. Then he looked at me again. You know what I think? He said. I think you've changed. I almost smiled. Because that line always comes when people lose control of the version of you they benefited from. How? You're obsessed with status now. Titles, impressions. You care more about those people than you do about me. Those people. As if my career had suddenly become some shallow social club. As if the years I had put into building it were nothing more than vanity, because he hadn't built it with me. I cared about you enough to want you there, I said. I cared enough to believe you could show up for me. That was my mistake. He flinched at that. Good. For a second, I saw the version of him I had loved. The funny one. The warm one. The one who kissed me in grocery store lines and made up ridiculous songs while cooking pasta and rubbed my shoulders when I worked too late on presentation decks. That version of him was real. That was what made this hard. But it wasn't the whole truth. And love built on partial truth always collects interest. Sooner or later you pay. I wish you well, I said. I meant it too. Not in a dramatic way, in the tired way. The done way. His jaw tightened. You're not serious. I am. So what, that's it? You just walk in here and dump me like I'm disposable? The irony of that almost took my breath away. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said the truest thing I'd said all week. No, Ethan, I'm leaving because I finally realized I've been the disposable one. His expression cracked, only for a second. But I saw it. The shock of hearing something he never expected to hear from me. I turned and opened the door. He didn't follow me. Didn't grab my arm. Didn't ask me to stay. He just stood there, stunned, as if the scene had veered off script and he no longer knew his lines. I walked to my car feeling shaky and strangely weightless. The grief didn't hit right away. What hit first was relief, and relief is a brutal kind of truth. I expected the real explosion later. I was right. Monday evening, my phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen in months. Megan, his older sister. We'd always gotten along well enough. She had this breezy, practical energy that made it seem like nothing could ever really rattle her. When I answered, her voice was cautious. Hey, she said, do you have a second? I do. There was a pause. Then, Ethan's over here. He's not doing great. I leaned back against my kitchen counter and closed my eyes. Of course he was at her house. Of course the family rollout had begun. He told me you broke up with him out of nowhere, she said carefully. I figured there was probably more to it. There was. What happened? So I told her. Not emotionally. Not theatrically. Word for word. I repeated exactly what he'd said at the dinner. I repeated the silence that followed. I repeated the fact that my CEO had been speaking when Ethan interrupted. When I finished, there was a long pause on the line. Then Megan exhaled slowly. Yeah, she said, that's bad. It is. But, she said, and there it was. You know how he is in those kinds of settings. I laughed once. Not because it was funny. Because sometimes disappointment comes out sounding almost like amusement. I did know, I said. That's why I prepared him for 2 weeks. That's why I told him exactly how important it was. That's why I asked for one evening of basic respect. She didn't answer immediately. I could hear movement in the background, a cabinet closing, a television on somewhere far away. Then she lowered her voice. He's talking about coming by your office. My whole body went cold. Not because I thought he would definitely do it, because suddenly I could picture it. Him angry, defensive, showing up in a lobby where my name was becoming known for the right reasons. Dragging private chaos into a place I had spent years earning respect in. That would be a terrible idea, I said. I know. I mean it, Megan. I know, she repeated more firmly this time. I'll talk to him. I believe she would. Whether he would listen was another matter. Before hanging up, she said softly, for what it's worth, I don't think you're overreacting. That almost made me cry. Not because I needed her validation, because after days of being made to feel like I was cruel for having boundaries, hearing one person say the truth out loud felt like somebody cracking a window in a room that had gotten suffocating. Thank you, I said. After we hung up, I stood alone in my kitchen for a long time. The apartment was quiet, too quiet. No second toothbrush near the sink, no shoes by the door that weren't mine, no text waiting for me asking what I wanted for dinner. The silence should have felt empty. Instead, it felt clean. And that scared me a little, because when peace arrives where love used to live, you have to ask yourself how long the love was already gone. By Tuesday morning, I had my answer, because that was when work pulled me into a different kind of reality. My boss called me into his office, closed the door behind me, and said, "I'm not going to pretend Friday didn't happen." My stomach dropped, not because I thought I was in trouble, because no matter how professionally you handle humiliation, there is still something awful about sitting across from your boss and knowing he witnessed one of the most personal, degrading moments of your adult life. He folded his hands. "I've been to a lot of these dinners," he said. "A lot. That was a first." I managed a tight smile. "I'm aware." That made him laugh. Then his face softened. "But here's what I want you to know. The way you handled it actually impressed people." I didn't say anything. He continued. "The CEO mentioned it this morning. Said, and I'm paraphrasing, that you kept your composure when most people would have lost it. He said that's exactly the kind of person he wants leading a region." Something hot stung behind my eyes. I looked away for a second, pretending to focus on the framed certificate behind his shoulder. Not because I needed praise. Because after spending days being told I was too cold, too proud, too harsh, it did something to me to hear that my restraint had been seen for what it actually was. Strength. "Thank you," I said quietly. He nodded. Then he added, almost casually, "Also, off the record, if Ethan shows up here, security handles it. Not you. That's protocol." The room seemed to tilt for half a second. The fact that he even had to say that this had crossed so firmly into professional risk territory that my company was already quietly preparing for boundaries, made something deeper settle inside me. This wasn't heartbreak anymore. Not just heartbreak. This was consequence. And I was done protecting him from it. By Wednesday, the texts started. Not frantic, not dozens at once. Just steady, strategic, every few hours, like he was trying to wear me down by persistence instead of volume. "I can't believe you're actually doing this. My mom thinks you're overreacting. Everyone I've told says this is ridiculous." Then later, "You embarrassed me by taking me home and then going back to that dinner." I stared at that one the longest. Because there it was again. Not remorse, not self-awareness. His humiliation in his mind had not come from what he said. It came from the fact that I had returned. From the fact that I refused to stay home and validate what he'd done. I responded only once. "I've made my decision. Please respect it. I wish you well." His reply came quickly. "Wow, you're actually cold. I wasted 2 years on someone who would throw me away over one dinner." I didn't answer. Because there are moments when replying is just another form of volunteering for your own erosion. And I was finished eroding. Completely. Even if the grief still had more to say. Even if the fallout was only beginning. Thursday evening, right on schedule, the next wave arrived. His mother. I saw her name flash across my phone and just stared at it for a second. There are some calls you know are not about understanding. They're about pressure. About reshaping reality until it fits a version that protects the person they love. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hello?" "Natalie," she said, her voice already tight with controlled frustration. "I've been meaning to call you." Of course she had. "I figured," I replied. There was a pause, brief, calculated, then she went straight in. "He told me what happened. I think you're making a very big mistake." I leaned against the kitchen counter, one hand pressed flat against the cool surface. "I don't think I am." "He made one mistake," she said. I almost corrected her, he, not she, but the slip didn't matter. What mattered was the framing. "One mistake." There it was again. "It wasn't one mistake," I said calmly. "It was a pattern. The dinner was just the most public example." "He doesn't understand your corporate world," she insisted. "That's not his environment. You can't expect him to behave perfectly in situations he's not comfortable in." "I didn't expect perfect," I said. "I asked for respectful." "That dinner sounded excessive," she continued, ignoring me. "All those executives, all that pressure." I told him exactly what it would be, I cut in. Still calm, still measured. 2 weeks in advance. I explained why it mattered. I asked for one evening of support. "And instead of helping him through it," she snapped, "you humiliated him by leaving him alone and going back." That stopped me. Not because it surprised me. Because it confirmed something. He hadn't just told his version of events. He had rewritten them. "I drove him home," I said, my voice quieter now, colder. I made sure he was safe. Then I returned to fulfill a professional obligation. "Well, that's not how he experienced it. I'm not responsible for how he reframes his own behavior." Silence. Sharp. Then she tried a different angle. You're throwing away 2 years over pride. No, I said. I'm ending a relationship where my partner belittles what matters to me. Her tone shifted again, softer this time, but edged. He's a good man. You think you're going to find better? There it was, the oldest argument in the book. Scarcity disguised as advice. I exhaled slowly. I think I'm going to find someone who's proud of me, I said. She didn't respond. For a second, I wondered if I'd pushed too far. Then she spoke again, voice clipped. You're making a mistake. Good night, I said, and I hung up. I stood there for a long time after the call ended, phone still in my hand, the silence in my apartment pressing in around me. It should have rattled me more. Her certainty, her disapproval, the weight of being cast as the unreasonable one. But instead, there was something else, a strange, steady calm. Like every conversation, Ethan's, Megan's, his mother's, wasn't confusing me. It was clarifying things, stripping away the parts I'd been negotiating with for too long. I made a sandwich, a simple one. Turkey, cheese, mustard, stood in my kitchen eating it slowly, staring out the window at nothing in particular. And halfway through, it hit me. I felt better, not happy, not healed, but lighter, like something heavy I'd been carrying without realizing it had finally slipped off my shoulders. And the absence of that weight felt like air. The next 4 days were quiet, suspiciously quiet. No calls, no texts, no sudden appearances. I went to work, sat in meetings, started settling into my new role. 16 people now reported to me. 16. The number felt abstract when I said it out loud, but very real when I looked at my calendar filling with check-ins, strategy sessions, performance reviews. It was a lot, but it was good. Busy in a way that felt purposeful. Grounding. For the first time since the dinner, I started to believe the storm might just pass. That things would fade out naturally. That he would cool down. That we would both move on. Friday night proved me wrong. My phone rang around 7:30. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Something made me pick up. Hello? Hi, Natalie. I hope this isn't too strange. The voice was warm, familiar in a distant way. It took me a second. Then it clicked. My CEO's wife. Oh, hi, I said, straightening unconsciously like she could see me. Not strange, just unexpected. I'm sorry to call you out of the blue, she said. I got your number from your boss's wife. I wouldn't have reached out if I didn't think it mattered. My chest tightened slightly. Of course. There was a brief pause. Then she said something that shifted everything. I wanted to tell you something about that dinner. I leaned against the counter again, listening carefully. After you left the first time, she said, your CEO looked at the table and said, that young woman just showed more class in 60 seconds than most people manage in a lifetime. I closed my eyes. The words landed somewhere deep. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just solid. Real. He wasn't bothered by what your boyfriend said, she continued. He was impressed by how you handled it. I swallowed, because that mattered more than I expected it to. Not for validation, but because for days I had been told, directly and indirectly, that I had overreacted, that I had escalated something small into something irreversible. And here was someone who had witnessed it all, telling me the opposite. I thought you should know, she said gently, because I have a feeling he's probably telling you a very different story. I let out a quiet breath. He is. I imagine so. We talked for a few more minutes. She told me about her husband's first marriage, how his former partner had also dismissed his work when he was building the company, how watching me that night had reminded them both of that time. And then she said something I knew I would carry with me for a long time. The right partner doesn't compete with your success, she said. They sit front row for it. After the call ended, I stood there in my kitchen again. Same spot as the night his mother called. But everything felt different, clearer. Like someone had adjusted the lens and the entire situation finally came into focus. This wasn't about one dinner. It wasn't about embarrassment. It wasn't about pride. It was about alignment. And we had never been aligned. I had just been hoping we were. Monday morning, 9:12 a.m. I was copied on an email from HR. Subject line, external complaint. For documentation only. My stomach dropped before I even opened it. And when I did, I felt something shift from emotional to strategic. The email was from Ethan, sent to our company's general inbox. Addressed to leadership. 4 paragraphs. 4 paragraphs of distortion so confident it almost felt like fiction. He claimed I had used the company dinner to publicly humiliate him, that I had abandoned him at the restaurant and forced him to find his own way home from an unfamiliar part of town. A complete lie. I had driven him directly to his apartment. He said the dinner environment was toxic and exclusionary, that it made him feel targeted, that he was considering reaching out to local media about how the company treated the partners of employees. And then the closing line. If I did not issue a public and professional apology, he would take further action. I stared at the screen for a long time. Not angry, not even shocked, just aware. This was escalation, calculated, documented, and no longer personal in the way it had been before. My HR director had forwarded it to me with a single sentence. FYI, we are not responding. Documenting only. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. My boss. Did you see the email? I did. There was a pause. Then, firm and steady. Legal reviewed it. There's nothing there. He's not an employee, not a client, not a vendor. He has no standing to make demands. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. Okay. If he contacts media, PR handles it, he added. Not you. I'm sorry this is spilling into... Stop, he cut in. You didn't create this situation. You ended a relationship. He escalated it. That's on him. I closed my eyes briefly, letting that settle. Focus on your role, he said. That's what matters. After we hung up, I sat at my desk for a long time. The office around me moving as usual. Keyboards clicking, phones ringing, conversations drifting in and out. Everything normal, except it wasn't. Because now there was a folder open on my computer. And in it, I started saving everything. Every text, every missed call, every screenshot, every email. Because something in me knew this wasn't over yet. And if he wanted to turn this into a narrative, I was going to be ready for it. By the end of that week, something inside me had fully shifted. Not cracked, not broken, reorganized. The emotional part of this, the confusion, the hurt, the constant second-guessing, had started to quiet down. What replaced it was something steadier, awareness, pattern recognition, the ability to look at everything that was happening and see it clearly for what it was. Wednesday evening, Megan called again. I almost didn't pick up, not because I was avoiding her, but because I already knew what the conversation would be about. Still, I answered. Hey, she didn't waste time. Please tell me he didn't actually email your company. I leaned back on my couch, staring up at the ceiling. He did. There was a sharp exhale on the other end. I told him not to, she said. I told him it was a terrible idea. I believe you. I'm so sorry, Natalie. That caught me off guard. Not because I expected an apology from her, but because it sounded genuine. He's telling people you got him blacklisted, she continued, that your company is threatening legal action, that your CEO personally called him to intimidate him. I let out a quiet breath. None of that happened. I didn't think so, she said. I just needed to hear it from you. There was a pause. Then, softer. I think he's struggling with this, and instead of dealing with it, he's building a version of events where he's the victim. I figured. I'm not excusing it, she added quickly. Just explaining. I understand. And I did. Understanding doesn't equal acceptance. But it helps you stop taking things personally that were never really about you. I need to be clear about something, I said. Okay. If he contacts my company again, or shows up at my office, I will pursue a restraining order. The words sat heavy in the air. Not dramatic. Not emotional. Just firm. For my career, I added. Megan didn't hesitate. That's fair, she said. I'll make sure he hears that. 2 days later, I got a text from an unknown number. Hey, this is Lila, Ethan's roommate. I frowned slightly, then opened the message. I don't know if this matters, but he's been telling people you embarrassed him at the dinner, that you made him sit through hours of boring conversation and then ditched him. I let out a humorless laugh. Of course he was. He showed me the email he sent your company. I told him it was a terrible idea. He said his mom helped him write it. I sat up straighter. Read that line again. His mom helped him write it. That explained a lot. The tone, the framing, the entitlement. I typed back. Thank you for telling me. I appreciate it. Then I took screenshots, saved them, added them to the folder, because at this point, this wasn't about reacting. It was about being prepared. After that, things slowed. He didn't contact the company again. Didn't show up at my office. The threat apparently had landed, but that didn't mean he was done. It just meant he was choosing a different angle. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. An actual physical envelope. Handwritten address. My name in his handwriting. For a second, I just stood there in my doorway, staring at it. Part of me didn't want to open it, because I already knew whatever was inside wasn't going to give me closure. It was going to give me clarity. And clarity sometimes is heavier. Still, I opened it. 3 pages. Handwritten. I sat at my kitchen table and read. Page 1 was nostalgia. All the good times. Trips we took. Dinners we had. The way we used to laugh. I felt that part. I won't pretend I didn't. Because those moments were real. They mattered. They just weren't enough. Page 2 shifted. Subtly at first, then not so subtly. He wrote about how I had changed, how I had become obsessed with my career, how I cared more about impressing those people than maintaining a real relationship, how I was becoming someone he didn't recognize. I stared at those lines for a long time, because they weren't entirely false. I had changed. I had grown. I had focused. But what he saw as obsession was actually commitment. What he saw as distance was actually me stepping into a version of my life that didn't revolve around shrinking to make someone else comfortable. Page 3 was where it all landed, where everything snapped into place so cleanly it almost felt scripted. He wrote that he had given me 2 years of his life, that he had supported me emotionally, that he had sacrificed social opportunities to attend my boring work events, and because of that, he believed he deserved compensation. 6 months of rent. As a fair settlement. I read that sentence twice, then a third time. Not because I didn't understand it, because I did. Perfectly. And I needed a second to process just how clearly it revealed everything I needed to know. 6 months of rent. For attending maybe 4 work events, 3 of which he left early. I folded the letter slowly, placed it back in the envelope, walked to my desk, and added it to the folder. No response. No reaction. Because some things don't require closure. They provide it. That was 2 weeks ago. Since then, life has settled into something new. Not perfect, but steady. Last Thursday, after a board presentation, my CEO pulled me aside. I had just walked them through our regional growth projections. It went well. Better than well. He looked at me for a moment, then said, "I've been where you are, early 30s, career taking off, wrong person in the passenger seat." I didn't say anything. Just listened. "It stings for a while," he continued. "Then one day you realize the sting was trying to teach you something." He gave me a small nod. "Don't let it slow you down." Later that night, my boss took me out for a drink. Nothing formal. Just a quiet bar, low lighting, the kind of place where conversations feel a little more honest. He told me something I didn't expect. In 20 years, he said, I have never seen the CEO comment on a junior executive's personal situation. I raised an eyebrow. "He talked about you," my boss continued. "Said that moment at the dinner told him more about your leadership than any performance review ever could." I looked down at my glass for a second. Letting that settle. "Don't waste that," he added. "I won't," I said. And I meant it. Here's where I am now. 3 weeks into the biggest promotion of my life. 16 people depending on me. Quarterly targets that are aggressive enough to keep me up at night. A calendar that doesn't leave much room for anything else. And honestly, that's okay. Because for the first time in a long time, my energy isn't split. I'm not trying to prove my worth to someone who already decided it didn't exist. I'm not explaining my ambition. I'm not shrinking my wins to make someone else comfortable. Do I miss him? Parts of him. The good parts. The easy parts. The version of him that showed up when there was no audience. But that version came with everything else. And I can't separate them. Not anymore. Last night, I made dinner for myself. Steak, garlic butter, roasted potatoes. A glass of bourbon. I sat at my kitchen table, alone. No TV. No music. Just silence. And it was peaceful. Genuinely peaceful. More peaceful than any dinner I'd had in the last 2 years. And that told me everything I needed to know. Some people would say I should have fought harder. That people say stupid things when they're uncomfortable. That relationships deserve second chances. Maybe. But here's the truth I landed on. You can't fix a problem someone refuses to see. And he still doesn't see it. There's a small sign on my office door now. My name. My title. Every morning I walk past it, and I think about that sentence. The one he said, "You're not even that important at your company." I smile a little, because now I know exactly how wrong he was. And the next person who sits across from me at a table like that is going to know it too. If there's one thing this whole thing taught me, it's this. Success isn't just about where you're going. It's about who's sitting next to you while you get there. And some seats are better left empty.